she strapped herself in every morning. That was the part nobody ever talked about. The fact that she did it herself, with small, careful hands, the buckles clicking into place at her wrists and ankles, before the soldiers ever arrived. She knew what she was. She just didn't think it should stop the day from starting. The chamber was 12 feet by 8, a cot, a desk bolted to the wall, a single panel of frosted polymer that let in light without letting in the world. The Veld called it Containment Unit 7, but Marin called it her room, because calling it her room cost nothing, and gave her something the soldiers couldn't take away with a key card. She was 11 years old. She had been 11 years old for as long as she could remember, which was exactly 3 years and 4 months, because before that, there were only the white walls of the early processing ward, and the smell of antiseptic, and the sound of a woman crying somewhere down the hall. She had asked once whether the crying woman was her mother. The doctor with the silver hair had smiled in a way that meant no. The soldiers came at 0630. Their boots in the corridor sounded like a single organism. 4 left feet, 4 right feet, the kind of coordination that came from fear dressed up as discipline. She could smell them before the door opened. Sweat, gun oil, the particular sour metal edge of people who had not slept well, and had not slept well for a very long time. She could smell their heartbeats, almost. The little chemical signals that the body threw off when the cortisol was rising. They were afraid of her, which she had decided long ago was both reasonable and sad. The door opened, 4 rifles, 4 faces trying to look like they hadn't just jumped at the click of the lock. "Good morning, Corporal Desch," she said to the one on the left. "Your wrist is better, that's good. I could see you favoring it last week." The corporal said nothing. None of them ever said anything. That was a standing order, Doctor. Naveen's standing order, no engagement, no personalization. Subjects are not to be treated as. But Marin had read that order upside down through the glass of his office door and knew what it said, and thought it was, in the strict scientific sense, stupid. You could not tell a person that a thing was not a person. The evidence was sitting right in front of you, strapped to a chair, watching you with amber eyes that caught the light in ways that human eyes didn't quite. She had amber eyes because the organism inside her had changed the way her cells processed pigment. She had read that in Dr. Naveen's files too. She thought it was beautiful, actually. Like having a piece of autumn light living behind her face. They wheeled her down the hall, past Unit 6, Unit 5. She could smell Damon through his door, that warm, complicated scent of a child who had been dreaming hard, and she was glad he was still there, still asleep, still himself. They passed the junction where the children's wing met the research block, and the smell changed to something that made her jaw ache. The particular chemical sweetness of the compound that Dr. Naveen's team used to suppress the secondary response, the hunger. They kept the ventilation separated. She knew that too. The classroom was at the end of the east corridor. It had 22 chairs bolted in rows, each one fitted with the restraint system, and most mornings, 15 or 16 of those chairs were occupied by children, ranging in age from 8 to 14, all of them strapped in, all of them watching the door with the same amber-lit patience. The soldiers locked each chair to its floor mounting, and then retreated to the wall, rifles at a port arms that was supposed to look casual but didn't. Then the teacher came in. Her name was Dr. Sarah Voss, and she was 41 years old, and she had been a university lecturer before the fall, back when there were universities, and she walked into that room every morning with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a battered data tablet under her arm, and she looked at every single child in every single chair, and she smiled at them like they were children in chairs, which was what they were. "Good morning," she said. Always first, always her. "Good morning, Dr. Voss," came the chorus. Marin said it with the others. She meant it more than the others, or maybe she just knew she meant it. Dr. Voss had brought her a book once. A real book, printed on paper, edges brown with age, a collection of Greek myths. Marin had read it in 4 hours and memorized it in 6. And then she'd lain awake until morning thinking about Pandora, about the box, about the thing that stayed at the bottom when everything else flew out. Hope. She'd thought about that for a long time. She'd thought, if hope is the last thing and it stays inside the box, is that good or bad? Is it being saved or is it being trapped? She hadn't told Dr. Voss her conclusion. She was still working on it. That morning, Dr. Voss was teaching them about the cascade. That was what the official Veld documentation called the fall, the cascade event, as if what had happened to the world was a feature of hydrology rather than the end of most things. A parasitic organism, she explained, genus Ophiomorph, had crossed the species threshold approximately 12 years ago. First reports out of the eastern coastal cities, then the interior. Then the Veld's predecessor governments had stopped reporting things, and what filled the silence instead was the sound of cities that had stopped making city sounds. What killed more people? Marin asked. The organism or the fear of the organism? The room went quiet. The soldier nearest the door shifted his weight. Doctor. Voss looked at her for a moment and then said, "That is an excellent question, Marin. What do you think?" "I think fear," Marin said, "because the organism is just doing what organisms do. It doesn't want anything. It isn't cruel. The things that happened after, the things people did to each other when they were afraid, those required wanting." Dr. Voss wrote something on her tablet. She wrote things when the children said things she wanted to remember. And she always wrote what Marin said. Marin had watched her do it enough times to recognize the gesture. And it made something warm happen in the middle of her chest that had nothing to do with the organism and everything to do with being 11 years old and wanting someone to hear you. That was the morning the perimeter fell. She felt it before the alarms. A change in the air. Not smell exactly, but pressure, the barometric signal of a large number of moving bodies crossing the sensor grid at the base's eastern edge. Her head came up. Around her she saw 4 or 5 of the other children do the same thing, their nostrils flaring, that old reflex that the organism had written into their shared architecture. Damon, 3 chairs to her left, turned his head toward the east wall and made a sound low in his throat that wasn't quite language. Then the alarms started. What followed had the quality of a nightmare in which everyone runs in different directions and none of the directions are right. Soldiers poured into the corridor. Dr. Naveen's voice over the intercom, clipped and certain, issuing orders that contradicted the orders of 3 minutes before. The children were left in their chairs. Protocol: in the event of perimeter breach, the subjects remain secured. The subjects remain in their rooms. And for 17 minutes, Marin sat in the classroom and listened to the bass die around her. She cataloged what she could hear. The specific acoustic signature of the ophiomorph host in full arousal state. That clicking, wet sound at the back of the throat, like a cable under load. The sound of the eastern gate going down, not an explosion, just a structural failure. The groan and pop of composite panels that had been installed in a hurry and maintained in an even greater hurry. Gunfire in 3 separate vectors, a scream that cut off. Another scream that didn't, and underneath all of it Dr. Voss's voice in the classroom doorway, low and rapid, arguing with someone. "You can't leave them here. Those are the protocols, Doctor." "Protocols for what? For a base that's still standing? Look at the board, Sergeant. Look at it." A pause. "If we move them, we risk. We risk nothing by moving them. They are children. They are physically the most capable people on this base, and you know it." Marin had heard Dr. Voss argue before with Dr. Naveen, mostly about research methodology and what she always called the moral dimension, which Dr. Naveen always responded to by adjusting his glasses and saying that moral philosophy was a luxury the current situation did not support. But she had never heard Dr. Voss's voice with this particular quality, not angry, past angry, clear. The door opened. Dr. Voss came in with a soldier behind her. She'd seen him before, the one they called Hatch, Sergeant Hatch, a broad-shouldered man with a fit that had been arranged by years of bad weather and worse decisions into something resembling a cliff face. He had his rifle up and down, then he looked at the room full of children in their chairs and something moved behind his eyes. "I'm going to unlock you," Dr. Voss said. "All of you. We're going to walk to the vehicle bay. You are going to stay close to me, and you are going to stay calm. Can you do that?" 15 amber-eyed children looked at her. "Yes, Dr. Voss," said Marin. The walk through the base was the most frightening thing Marin had ever experienced, and she had a referential baseline that included 3 years of medical procedures, 2 of which had involved tissue extraction without adequate local anesthetic, because Dr. Naveen believed the compound interfered with sample viability. What made it frightening was not the bodies. She processed those with a clinical remove that she would think about later, in the truck, in the dark, but the smell of outside pouring through the broken eastern gate. Not the compound, not the suppressant, just air, raw, unfiltered and absolutely saturated with the olfactory signal of the ophiomorph host colony moving through the base grounds. Her jaw ached. She kept it shut. Beside her, Damon made the low sound again. "Don't," she said quietly, not unkindly. He looked at her. He was 8 years old and he didn't have as much practice at the keeping shut. She reached out and took his hand, and he held it so hard she felt her fingers compress, and she thought, This is what the organism doesn't understand. This small, specific, inconvenient love. They reached the vehicle bay. Dr. Navin was already there, and his expression when he saw the children coming through the door was a compressed drama. Relief, alarm, calculation, and then the carefully flattened professional effect that he used the way other people used armor. Behind him, a large military transport sat with its rear ramp down. 2 soldiers were loading equipment. Another was arguing into a radio at a frequency that appeared to be receiving nothing but static. Sarah, Dr. Navin's voice. This wasn't authorized. The authorization structure dissolved approximately 20 minutes ago, Dr. Voss said. Get in the truck, Marcus. The truck. The 15 children in the truck, which was the second most frightening thing. The ramp went up. The light went from compound yellow to a single amber emergency strip along the ceiling. And for a moment Marin looked at her own hand and saw her skin lit the same color as her eyes and thought, I wonder if the light knows something. Hatch drove. He drove very fast and with the lights off, which Dr. Voss explained was because the ophiomorph host colony had limited visual acuity in daylight but acute motion tracking in response to light sources, which Marin already knew but appreciated hearing explained out loud because it meant Dr. Voss was treating them like people who deserved explanations. The bass sounds faded. Outside, through the truck's sensor array, displays on a small screen near the cab, which Marin could see from her position on the bench, the terrain spread. What had been the outskirts of a regional city, now a landscape of stopped things. Vehicles, buildings mid-collapse, trees growing through windows. The ophiomorph colony was thick here. The readout showing thermal signatures in clusters, hundreds of them, standing perfectly still, in the way they stood still when they weren't triggered. Like statues arranged by a very methodical god. The truck moved between them. Marin watched the screen and breathed through her mouth. Dr. Navin spoke for the first time in 40 minutes. We need to stop. Hatch, not yet. The research samples are unstable above 30 degrees and the cab temperature is. The samples, Hatch said, in a voice that made the word smaller than it had been, can wait. Silence. Marin watched Dr. Navin's hands. He had long fingers, precisely maintained, the hands of a man who thought of them as instruments. They were clasped in his lap, and they were very still, which was how she knew he was not. She had always understood Dr. Navin. That was the uncomfortable truth. She understood him the way you understand a mechanism, not agreeing with it, but being able to trace the gears. He was not cruel for cruelty's sake. He was the kind of person who had convinced himself that the arithmetic worked. Suffering now against survival later, subjects against a species, small life against large life. The problem with that kind of arithmetic is that it requires you to believe your own numbers, and your numbers require you to believe that the suffering is real, but doesn't count. Marin had thought about this a great deal. She had thought about it while lying on his examination table, watching the lights above her and feeling things she had decided not to name. She counted her breaths. She could do that. They drove for 3 hours before the truck stopped, and when it stopped, it was because of the bridge. The bridge was an old motorway overpass, concrete 4 lanes, and it had been barricaded at the near end by someone who was no longer there to explain their reasoning. A concrete mixer. 3 abandoned emergency vehicles. A wall of debris that had partially collapsed, leaving a gap approximately wide enough for a person and not quite wide enough for the truck. Hatch assessed it from the cab for a long time. Then he came back to the cargo bay and said, "We go on foot from here. 15 kilometers to the relay station. If the comms equipment there is intact, I can reach Central Command. If Central Command is intact." He stopped. "Is Central Command intact?" Dr. Voss asked. Hatch looked at her. The cliff face quality was more pronounced. "I don't know," he said. "Probably not the way it was. But some version of it. There's always some version." That was something, Marin thought. There's always some version. That was the human thing, right there. Not the certainty of survival, but the insistence that if you couldn't have certainty, you would settle for a version, and then make the version work. They went on foot. Hatch, Dr. Voss, Dr. Navin, 2 soldiers whose names Marin learned were Price and Okafor, 15 children. Through the barricade, into the city, on the other side of the bridge, which was a different kind of silence than the base had been. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of a held breath, a city-sized thing that hadn't exhaled in 12 years. The ophiomorph hosts were everywhere, standing. Thousands of them, in the stopped cars, on the stopped escalators, in the doorways and the parks, and the shopping arcade where every window was opaque with vine growth. They stood with their heads slightly tilted, the way hosts always stood when at rest, and in the gray afternoon light they looked like a forest of people. Marin kept close to Dr. Voss. She kept Damon's hand. She moved the way she had practiced in her room, in the 12 feet by 8, moving quietly through the dark, heel to toe, weight transferred slowly, no sudden shifts in center of mass. She had practiced because she had known, always, that one day the controlled environment would end. That was another thing, Doctor. Naveen's files had said that the controlled environment was a measure of duration, not a permanent solution. The children moved like smoke, quiet and dispersed and low. Hatch watched them do it, and his expression shifted into something that wasn't his usual cliff face. Something closer to what Dr. Voss's face did when Marin said something worth writing down. 3 hours into the city, they found the children. Not like them, the wild ones. A tribe of hybrid children, indeterminate number, inhabiting the upper floors of a commercial block. Marin smelled them before she saw them, the same base chemistry as her own but wilder, less suppressed. The hunger more present in the scent signature. They watched from the windows above. Some of them were wearing clothing, in the way that suggested they understood clothing as a concept, but not its full function. Some of them were not. "Don't look at them," Hatch said low. "They won't attack if we don't trigger," Marin said. He looked at her. "I can smell where they are," she said. "There are 9 of them tracking us. If we go left at the next junction and move fast, we'll be outside their territory in 11 minutes. "How do you know their territory?" "The scent markers they use, it's not relevant. Left fast, 11 minutes. He stared at her for another second, then looked at Price, then looked left down the junction street, then said, "Move." They moved. 11 minutes. The tracking stopped when she said it would stop. She heard Hatch exhale behind her. They didn't speak about it, but something shifted. She felt it, the way she felt most things. Not with the organism's acute sensory architecture, but with the part of her that was still and simply a child who paid attention. Something in Hatch's posture when he stood near her. An adjustment. A recalibration. The relay station was a former telecommunications hub on the eastern edge of the city. A squat gray building inside a chain-link compound that still had most of its fence intact. Okafor went through first with a sweep, came back clear. They came in through the side gate and Hatch locked it behind them. And for the first time in 7 hours, Marin let herself breathe through her nose. Inside smelled of old equipment and dust and faintly rain that had come through a crack in the roof and dried and come through again over many years. But no hosts, no chemical trace of host. Safe, in the immediate sense of the word. The children found corners and sat in them. Damon sat against Marin's side and fell asleep almost immediately. The deep boneless sleep of an 8-year-old who has been afraid for too long. She felt his weight against her and put her arm around him and sat with her back to the wall. Dr. Voss found her there, later, when the light through the high windows had gone amber and then purple. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Marin said then. "What happens now?" Dr. Voss sat down on the floor beside her. This was something Marin had noticed. She would do that, just sit on the floor like it was ordinary, like floors were for sitting on, like the physical gesture of being at eye level was worth more than the dignity of a chair. It probably was. "Hatch is trying to reach command," she said. "If he can, they'll send extraction. And if they send extraction, what happens to us?" Dr. Voss was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. I will not let them hurt you. I want you to know that. Whatever else happens." Marin looked at her. She had amber eyes and she used them to look at people very directly, which made some people uncomfortable. Dr. Voss was not some people. "You can't promise that," Marin said. "No," Dr. Voss agreed. "But I can mean it. That night, Doctor." Naveen found what he'd been looking for since the truck stopped. A sealed equipment locker in the relay station's lower level that held, among other things, a portable analysis unit compatible with his research samples. She knew because she heard him, through the floor, moving things with the careful, deliberate sounds of a man who thought he was working in secret. She knew what he was looking for. She had read enough of his files. The synthesis project, the one that required cellular material from a hybrid child in a dosage that Dr. Voss had described in a meeting Marin had listened to through 2 walls, as requiring the subject to not survive it. The compound he was building would potentially, if it worked, provide an immunological template for the remaining uninfected population. If it worked, if there was a remaining uninfected population, if, he had always been so certain his arithmetic was correct. She sat with Damon sleeping against her side, and she thought about Pandora's box, and the thing at the bottom, and whether it was saved or trapped. And she's made her decision without drama, which was the only way decisions of that size could be made. In the morning she went downstairs. Dr. Navin was at his portable unit, his back to the door. He heard her and turned, and his face did the complicated drama again. Compressed, controlled. Marin, he said. I know what you're building, she said. I've known for 2 years. He was very still. I read upside down, she said. I read through walls. I have very good hearing, and I remember everything I've heard, and I understand more of it than you think I do. She paused. I think the synthesis could work. I think your biological model is sound. I also think there's a less efficient delivery method that doesn't require what you're planning to require. He blinked. I've been thinking about it, she said. Since I was 9 years old. Approximately. I've had a lot of time to think about things. You've been, he stopped, restarted. Marin, the delivery mechanism is, I know what it is. I'm offering you an alternative. She came further into the room. I can produce the compound myself. I can catalyze it. It's a function of the secondary response, the one you suppress with the ventilation. If I allow the response to occur in a controlled setting, in a sealed environment, the compound will be biologically active and airborne within 6 hours. A dosage sufficient for. She did the calculation she'd been doing in her head since she was 9 years old, refining it, checking it. For the remaining population in this region, which by your own estimates is between 400 and 800 people. The silence in the room had a specific quality. She'd heard it before. The silence of a person recalculating. You would survive that, he said, slowly. Yes, the children would survive it. Yes, because we're already changed. The compound isn't toxic to us. It was never toxic to us. She held his eyes. You were going to kill me for something that didn't need me to die. He sat down on a crate. For the first time, she saw him without the armor. Just a man who had been so focused on the arithmetic that he had forgotten to check whether the problem was solvable another way. If you knew this, he said, why didn't you say anything? Because, Marin said carefully, I needed to know whether anyone would listen. She took what she needed from his equipment locker. She brought it upstairs and laid it out on the floor, and Dr. Voss found her there and sat down next to her again, without asking questions, which was why Dr. Voss was Dr. Voss. Hatch came in an hour later and looked at what was laid out and said, What's this? A different solution, Marin said. He looked at Dr. Voss. Dr. Voss looked at Marin. Marin looked at Hatch. There's a radio mast on the building's roof, Marin said. The relay equipment may still be functional. If Sergeant Okafor can get the transmission array online, I can give you a window. Call it 4 hours, to reach anyone within broadcast range and tell them to find sealed structures. After that, you bring me up there and I do what I do and the compound disperses. She let a beat pass, and the cascade ends. Hatch sat down. This was notable because she had never seen him sit down voluntarily in any non-mandatory context. You're 11 years old, he said. Yes, you worked this out when you were 9. I had a lot of time to think. He looked at her for a long time. His face did something she had not seen it do before, not the cliff face. Something older and, she thought, something that might have been there before the cliff face, the original feature that the years had buried. Okay, he said. It took 6 hours to get the relay array functional. Okafor was extraordinary at it. She watched him work with a focused competence that she filed away as another version of the human thing. The capacity to improvise, to work with what was present rather than what was required, to look at a 12-year-old piece of broken equipment and find in it not failure but material. Hatch broadcast for 4 hours. Not a narrow-band transmission, wide repeating. Coordinates and instructions in the word shelter, shelter, find sealed shelter. We have 4 hours, shelter. Whether anyone was listening, she didn't know. Hatch didn't know. He did it anyway. That was the part she thought about. Later, he did it anyway. She brought the other children to the roof with her. That was her choice, not Hatch's. He had started to say something about risk, and she had looked at him and said, They're part of this. And he had closed his mouth. They stood on the roof of the relay station in the late afternoon light, 14 hybrid children, ranging from 8 to 14, all of them amber-eyed, all of them quiet, and below them the city spread for miles. In every direction, the ophiomorph hosts standing in their thousands in the streets and the parks and the open places, motionless, tilted, patient. Dr. Voss stood at the rooftop doorway. Marin looked at her. Go back inside, Marin said. Seal the door, Marin. Please, Marin said. I need you to be all right. I need someone to be all right and come back and tell people what happened here. Dr. Voss looked at her for a long time. Then she did something she had never done before. She walked forward and put her arms around Marin and held on. Marin held on too. She was 11 years old, and she had amber eyes and an organism in her that could ant the cascade, and she was very small in the circle of Dr. Voss's arms, and she counted the seconds of it like she counted breaths. Her name was Marin, Dr. Voss said, very quietly into her hair. My name is Marin, Marin corrected her. Present tense. She let go. She stepped back. She looked at the 14 children standing with her and she said, "Are you ready?" They were. She could feel it in the way they stood. Feet slightly apart, shoulders relaxed, the posture of people who understood what was required and had decided. They were children, but they were also what came after children. The next attempt, the organism's version of hope, she let it happen. The secondary response came up through her like a warm tide, the hunger she had kept behind her teeth for 3 years, and she pointed it outward and upward, and instead of feeding, she transformed. The compound came off her skin like breath, invisible, atmospheric, real. She felt the other children doing the same, their individual chemistries threading into hers, amplifying. The air above the relay station shimmered with something that could not be seen but could, she thought, be felt, the way you feel a storm before it arrives. The hosts in the streets below began to change, not quickly, not like a scene in a film. Slowly the way a tide turns. First one, then the cluster around it, then wider, the chemical signal propagating through the colony network. Host to host, through the click-and-breath language of the organism. They began to move differently. The tilted quality changed. Heads came up. Some of them looked at the sky. She watched it happen for 20 minutes. Then she went back downstairs. Dr. Naveen was in the corner of the lower level, his analysis unit open, running numbers. He was running numbers on what he had just watched happen from the window. She sat down across from him. "Your delivery model was wrong," she said, "but your synthesis was right." He looked at her over the top of his unit. "I know," he said. "The model needed a variable you didn't include," she said. "A collective source. Individual samples wouldn't have been biologically active enough. It needed all of us." He looked at her for a while. Then he said, "I wouldn't have thought of that." "No," she said. "You're 11 years old. You keep saying that. It keeps being true." She thought he was going to say something else. He didn't. He went back to his numbers, and she went back upstairs. And outside the city was making new sounds. Not the sounds it had made before the fall, not anything she had ever heard, but sounds nonetheless, which was different from silence. Hatch was on the roof. He was standing at the eastern edge, looking out at the city, with his rifle slung and his hands loose at his sides, and he didn't look like a cliff face anymore. He looked like someone who had come out the other end of something, and was taking a moment to notice. She stood beside him. "Did anyone hear the broadcast?" she asked. "We got 3 responses before the window closed," he said. 2 from the city, 1 from about 40 kilometers north. He paused. "Could be more. Could be a lot more if the signal carried." "It carried," she said. She had felt it go out. He nodded slowly. Below them, in the street directly in front of the station, one of the hosts, a former host, she supposed, though she didn't know what the right word was now, was sitting down on the curb. Just sitting. Like a person who needed to sit for a minute. "What do we do now?" Hatch asked. Marin thought about it. She thought about the book of Greek myths, which she had left in her room at the base, which no longer existed in any useful sense. She thought about Pandora, about the box, about whether hope was being saved or being trapped. She had her answer now. Hope was not saved, and it was not trapped. Hope was the thing that didn't know the difference. It stayed because it stayed. Because the quality of staying, of remaining in the place after everything else has fled, was its own kind of choosing. You couldn't trap hope. It just stayed. It stayed the way a child strapped herself into her chair every morning, carefully, buckle by buckle, before the soldiers arrived. Not because she had to, but because she had decided the day was worth starting. "We go back in," she said. Dr. Voss and she thought about what Dr. Voss needed, which was complicated, and also simple. She needs someone to teach. Give her that. Hatch looked at her. "And after that," he said. "After that," Marin said, "we figure out what version we are." She turned away from the edge. She went back through the rooftop door and down the stairs, and into the room where 14 children were sitting in a loose group. Not in chairs, not in rows, just sitting the way people sit when they're tired and have done something large and true. Damon was awake. He looked at her, and she sat down next to him, and he leaned against her shoulder. And she let him because he was 8 years old, and he had been afraid for a long time, and she was not afraid anymore. She was something else. She was the girl on the other side of fear, which didn't have a name yet, but she thought they would find one. She thought they would find a lot of things, given enough time, given enough of the one thing left in the box. She sat with her back to the wall and she listened to the changed city make its new sounds, and she waited, with all the patience of a thing that had always known it was built to last, for tomorrow.